There we go. Good morning, everybody.
Hello. Good morning.
It's quite fun, the way with Zoom, you can let everybody in all in one go, you know? Oh, dear me, I'm easily amused.
That helps.
Yeah, great. I'm just, there's just people are just showing up here, so I'm just letting them in the door. One thing I have to say, I created a sort of logistical nightmare for myself by I emailed like 180 people who'd been on Pragmatic Tracker on either PTSD resolution or the HCI site, and then I had all these emails coming back in and trying to track, you know, who was coming and who wasn't coming and who did I send the link back out to again. So after it driving me nuts, late last night, I was reading on Zoom that you can create quite easily, I think, if you arrange your meeting on Zoom website, you can create a registration so that it goes out to people, and then whoever wants to register registers, and then it's all, I don't have to do any of that nonsense anymore. So I'm hoping I'll do that the next time anyway. Great. So hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. We had a really nice session last night as well, with about 12 or 13 people in, I think. So that was great. And looks like something similar today. I just have to keep an eye out in the first few minutes in case there's any late arrivals. I don't want anyone to get sort of locked out of the meeting. So Happy New Year to you all, or New Year, whatever about it being happy. Let's hope it improves as the year goes by anyway, you know, and keep our fingers crossed, as Joe says. And so without further ado, let me get cracking here. Let me get to the right place. And so, no, that one. There. Okay, so you can see my, hopefully, let me just make sure is that okay, everyone?
Yep.
Yeah, fine. Put you over there now, and I have to be able to use that. All right. Okay. So welcome. Now, amongst our flock today, we might have some newcomers, some people who've actually they haven't even been into Pragmatic Tracker yet. So you're very welcome. I know in a couple of weeks' time, we're doing some a new sort of event for training some, you know, complete beginners, if you like. So I'm looking forward to that. But I did invite them to come along today if they wanted to, just to have a look in. And what I said was, you know, don't worry. Whatever you see today, if you think, oh my God, I have no idea what any of that's about, please don't worry about it. That's completely fine. So my suggestion was, now actually I don't know what I've done with my screen here about viewing you, but anyway, I'm just going to stop the share for 1 second. Oh, there we are. That's better. So I can see everybody. I'm just worried about. So my plan roughly here is to try and keep an eye on you. And if there's a chat, you know, the chat down at the bottom, I can keep that window open. So what I suggest is, if stuff is coming into your heads as I'm rabbiting on about something, put a little note down there to bring my attention to it. And then I'll check back into the chat to make sure I'm sort of addressing it, you know. Okay, let me go back to my presentation. And feels like sort of conducting an orchestra here, trying to, right, am I back sharing the presentation with you now? Yeah. Okay, so first point I just wanted to make, I made this before, the continuing professional development definition in the HGI members area is what's written up here on the screen. I don't claim to be running CPD on behalf of HGI or anything like that, but I think this sort of event fits perfectly into the category. You can check it out for yourself, but I think you're perfectly justified in considering it to be an hour of CPD. So you don't, you're not wasting your time here. So first things first, I wanted to update you on just something that we did only last week. I want to check in before I go on about my theme subject of the day with you for any issues or concerns you've currently got, so I can address those. And then I want to move on to a bit of a theme for the session, which is, why do we do any of this stuff anyway? What's the point in it all? What are we doing here? And then spend some time on issues around the choice of measures that we use in this business of outcome-informed practice, if you like. So the first thing I wanted to say, with the update that we did last week, we had a problem, and you may have had a problem you weren't aware of, which, but you might have been a bit aware of it, where a client might have said, maybe they didn't turn up for an appointment. And then they say, I emailed you to cancel the appointment, and you couldn't find any email. Well, what was happening was, when verification emails were going out from Pragmatic Tracker, and reminder messages and links to questionnaires, etc., in emails, even though we had clearly written, do not reply to this email, unfortunately, a lot of people reply because your name gets associated with that do not reply address. And so they get confused. So it's only a minority, but we noticed this, we were monitoring it, and we realized this was happening. So what we've done is we've made it now so that if somebody hits one of those emails and just goes reply, it will automatically come through to you. So hopefully that won't, you may not have even known you had an issue, but now you can know that you shouldn't have it anymore, hopefully. That's one thing. The other thing is that the deliverability of our emails, I mean, no matter what we do, there will be a small percentage of emails you'll find with your clients from the system that just don't arrive. They check their spam and everything and they can't find them. It's a huge problem internationally, to be honest, because of the volume of spam and junk and rip-offs and hackers and all the rest of it going on. Email filtration systems are constantly trying to get wise to anyone using any means. And it's very difficult to make a generic email coming out from a software system, which has particularly got a link in it, like to questionnaires. We have to do an awful lot to protect that, to get it to deliver. And we do the best we can. Obviously, you do have SMS now as an alternative way, if you want to, because the SMS will carry the link to the questionnaires in it as well, you know? So I'm watching the chat. So I'll keep an eye on that. If anyone's got anything, just pop it in there. There was also a date conflict issue with the goals builder. I won't even go into it. You may have thought, oh, there's something a bit weird about that. Anyway, it's fixed. I just want to let you know that that's fixed. So Human Givens is now on the very latest release, which is only last week, of Pragmatic Tracker, and there's a huge amount of under the bonnet improvements in it, security wise and all the rest of it. But I think we have a stomping good system. Is it possible to add if people are doing face-to-face or Zoom, etc.? May be helpful. Sorry, I better, can you unmute yourself, whoever that is, and just explain the question to me? Oh, Carmen, it's Carmen. Yeah.
It's just that I had a conversation with Tony from PTSD Resolutions, and I'd had a new client being referred from somebody who didn't want to do Zoom or kind of virtual sessions, and I'm doing face-to-face in my garden with radiator and things like that. So it's just Tony was asking me, could I put it on inside my notes, whether I'm doing face-to-face or virtual? And I thought, well, there's nothing there for me to click. And just if it would be helpful to say whether we're doing face-to-face or phone calls or how we're meeting our clients, especially now with pandemic.
Absolutely, great point. And that's actually easy for us to do. So what would the choices of the drop-down be in the session? Face-to-face and virtual, would that be enough?
Or phone call, I suppose.
Or yeah, so it's face-to-face, Zoom, phone call.
Yeah, maybe you want to add walk and talk, but I mean, it doesn't, I suppose that's still face-to-face, isn't it? I think it's just interesting to see how people...
Yeah, absolutely, great point. Sure. I think that we can do that very easily. We've got spare fields in the session record. So when you go into a session on that day, you could choose which way you delivered your care, you know? Yeah, great point. Thank you.
Bill?
Hello?
Joe, hi.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. Just to add to that, I think that's a brilliant suggestion, Carmen. Can you make walk and talk separate? Because I find it's quite a different experience to sitting face to face with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. So face-to-face, Zoom stroke virtual.
Yeah, and Judith is just saying very sensibly, just call it video because it could be FaceTime.
Yeah, very sensibly. Oh, what helpful people you all are. Video call. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Absolutely. Sure, we can do that. No problem. Okay. Yeah, what I wanted to do here was just give a slot before I get carried away rabbiting on about stuff, in case there's anything that you're struggling with, you know, in Pragmatic Tracker, anything you don't understand, I can go over to a live system and do that. But I mean, if you're fine, if you're happy with, you know, how you get on, and you're not struggling with it, that's fine. But I just wanted to make the space for it. So, anybody got anything? Oh yeah, Sandra, great. Yeah. I'll just stop this. Oh, there's somebody waiting to get in. Look at them. Oh dear. Right, they're in now. Right, Sandra, tell me.
I'm quite new to using it, so it might be something I've done wrong. But I've added a client on, and I've got goals on one session, but then on the next one I haven't, and then on the next one I have. In terms of it didn't collect the score, it didn't send out the measure, and I'm not sure what I've done. I did add it and take it away, and add it and take it away, and I added the first one. I put in the goal score retrospectively, because it was after we'd had the conversation in the session. Yeah. And I wanted to do that for the second one as well, because it didn't include it.
Okay.
And I can't see how to add it retrospectively, but I've already done it once for some. But I did it on the same day, whereas this wasn't the same day, and I didn't know if that was related to your date.
It is. You've got there ahead of me. So, right. Are you in? You can see HGI on your screen now, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just a pretend case, you know. So the point about goals is that in profile, first of all, you would need it chosen here, right?
Yeah, it is.
And secondly, then when you go to a session, this is how you edit a session if you have anything about a session you wanted to change. So let's just go in here, for example. So that one, it isn't there because I hadn't it chosen in the profile. Had it been chosen in profile, it would have by default been on, right?
Yeah.
The difficulty though is this. I mean, let's say that was yesterday's date, you know, and if you're going to go add a goal, the date of the goal, this date here, must match the date of the session that you want it to be associated with. So if you're adding a goal retrospectively, like the next day after the session, then because you got a score, you know, you asked the client about it in the session, you must make sure you change that date to the date of the session yesterday. Otherwise, it won't show up in the session record. That's usually the explanation for it, you know. If you're still struggling with that, come back to me about it, and I could look at your particular client with you, you know, out of this meeting, to help you with it. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to do it whilst talking, which is not proving sensible.
Okay. Could the time be displayed along with the date in client view? Sarah, can you explain that to me?
Yes, of course. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I like to look at the client view to see who's coming up, and I also keep records of what time they're coming in a different calendar.
When you say the client view, do you mean the client list page?
Yes, exactly. So when you do the client list and you click on date, you can see them in the order of the dates coming. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me just go back here. Oh, I keep getting pushed out of it. So if I go my clients, these are all pretend clients. You mean here, so the next appointment would also have the
Yeah.
time there. Oh, that's
If
an
I
interesting
notice-
request. Hmm.
Just because I have occasionally, it's like input error. I make a mistake
Right.
on the time. And of course, then all the reminders are going out at the wrong time and I can't spot it from that view.
Right, yeah. Time as well as date. Could I also ask you, I'm writing stuff down here, but in case I forget it or can't read my own writing, email me these points afterwards as well, would you?
Yeah.
I'll bring it up. Now, I can tell you what the developer is going to say. He's going to say, forget it, because there's so much stuff rammed in on this screen already, you know? But, you know, you never know. He might come up with an innovative way of doing it. Like if, I don't know, I'll bring it up anyway and see. It is a very good point. I'll bring it up and see what I can find out about for
Thank
you.
you.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you.
That's that. Any other burning issues with anybody? Okay, so we'll carry on. All right.
Sorry, Bill,
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I posed a question there in the chat.
Oh, did you? Sorry. Could the time? I can't see it in the chat. Just tell me. Just say the question. Hello. Who's that? That's
Sorry, it's Martin here.
oh, Martin. Yeah, sorry, Martin. I can't see it in the chat. The question.
Yeah. Well, what I wrote was that I haven't worked with couples yet, but I'm wondering if you are working with a couple and you're sending them individual measures, would it be possible to link those two measures for comparison?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's you can't really. Well, there's different ways of doing this. There's two ways of doing it, both of which are fudges really. One is you create an entity that's the client is actually two people, right? So it's like the couple, if you like. What you would have to do is, again, offline, you know, come back to me about this, because what you can do, what measure would you typically be using with them, Martin?
I suppose emotional needs.
Right. So something like the emotional needs audit or
I
PR14.
haven't worked with couples yet myself.
Right. Okay.
This is something I was thinking about.
Oh, good. Okay. So it's a hypothetical question.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll answer your hypothetical question then. So what I could do for somebody who was working with couples who wanted to, for example, administer PRN14 to both of them and look at them, sort of not have to come out of one client and into another client, is I could create a second version of PRN14 for you. So you could call it PRN14 C1 and PRN14 C2, for example, right? And then in the same client, which would be the couple, if you like, you could then you could capture the information like that. The difficulty though is the email, because you can only have one email address associated with a client, you know? The other way of doing it, which is, and again, none of these are that satisfactory. The other way of doing it is to create your client ID very similar to the client ID of the first case. So, so that it would sit next to it on your client list. It would just follow naturally on your client list, you know? Neither of those things are great, but then in fairness, it is a hypothetical question.
I'm just wondering if anyone else here has.
Yeah, I would be interested to know. Has anyone got anything to say about this? Joe?
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting idea, because I've been doing quite a bit of work with couples on Zoom since over lockdown. And I just do the thing you have to do, which is like create one for couple A, one for partner B, and they're separate. But I like your thinking, and I'm just wondering, is it possible to make a version of the PRN14 which could be a couple's needs audit, which could kind of, I know this is a slight side question to it, but I'm just wondering if that might be a way forward, because I'm not sure if you'd want it depends on the situation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whether you want partner A to see partner B's needs or not,
Yeah.
or their measures.
That's
but I
right.
think joint couples needs audit could be a really interesting thing, because you could say, oh, look,
Sure.
partner A is scoring that really, really low, but you're scoring that really, really high. Let's
Yeah,
start that
exactly.
base or something like that.
I mean, it is so, you know, I have to say, to be honest, we haven't had a huge sort of demand for
Fair
developing something around couples. It is something we're aware of, and it's on the radar. And Joe, you know, you're always on the wet edge of the paintbrush, Joe. So, you know, if you can come up with
Plodding around.
some ideas for us to sort of
Yeah,
explore with
we
that,
can talk about that.
definitely, yeah.
We could do a session on
We
that.
could
now.
do it, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
great,
you.
great. Okay, sure.
What's
I
funny
think
that I thought was I attended the Jennifer Broadley couples therapy,
Oh yeah,
and she had an example where one of the partners was scoring all sevens,
yeah.
and, you know, on the emotional needs, and then the other
Yeah.
partner scoring very low. So it was, yeah, that got me thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you should be able to open Pragmatic Tracker twice in your browser if you like, or use two different browsers. Like you have one client open in Zoom
Okay.
Chrome and another one open in Safari if you're a Mac user or whatever, or, you know, Explorer or whatever like that. And then you could flip from one to the other, you know, like I'm doing toggling from one screen to the other here, you know. That would be probably a better way to do it, to be honest, because then you also have a separate email then for the, you know, the man and the woman, or you know, either of the partners, whichever one it is, you know.
Can I just say that I think scoring emotional needs for the individuals is one thing, but actually you can also do an emotional needs audit for the marriage,
Yes,
for the
yeah,
actual relationship, which is different to the individuals.
that's right. Yeah,
So the permutations
they're pretty
are
endless, aren't they?
extensive, and then you've
Yeah.
got the family one,
Yeah.
but they can look very different.
They can, you know, and I mean, that is an area of, I mean, to be honest with you, I think the reason we haven't really cracked it is because we don't quite know how to deal with it. It's, and I mean, it's the same in a lot of software that, you know, it's very difficult to get away from the entity of an individual client sort of thing, you know, but, you know, we can but try. Carmen, did you have something to?
It's not really a solution, but just something I used recently with a couple, and that was just putting their initial on the same sheet so you could see the difference, if you like.
Yeah, but you were doing it on paper, were you?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is obviously that's a bit easier to manage than in paper.
I'm sorry, Bill, is it possible to do two instances of Pragmatic Tracker in the same browser?
Well, you'll notice here I keep getting logged out, you see. So our security pushes you out because it knows you're trying to get into the same place. But you can try it. I mean, I think we used to be able to do it before, probably because the security wasn't as good, but I don't think you can do it actually anymore. But what you would be able to do, are you a Mac user or a PC user?
Both.
Oh, okay.
PC for this, yeah.
Okay. So if you had, for example, Firefox and Chrome, then you could open one client in Firefox and the other in Chrome, and then just jump from one to the other, you know? So that would be a way of doing it, all right.
Right.
Great. How interesting. Right, anything else? No, I can.
Just wanted to add to that, actually. I do a lot of work with children, and so sometimes the measures I would do the parent and the child rather than it being a couple, which again are really useful to compare.
Oh yes,
Adding
yes,
that.
yes. Now that's very interesting. Is it the ORCADS measures you no, it isn't. No,
Yeah.
the
I am,
ORCADS.
so yeah,
All right.
at the moment, but yeah.
Yeah, because I haven't got the have I got the ORCADS in HTI? I don't know. Have I put them on for you? No.
It's not I don't use the archives in private work. I use that in NHS work, so it's not entirely
right, okay.
relevant. But I haven't started seeing children in private practice yet. But my ears are pricking up at the
idea of it,
of how that's going to work.
Well, you'd be interested.
You can do emotional needs for both. By
you can, of course, yeah, and of course, there's lots of the children's version of the ORS and the SRS measures as well. Yeah. We do have the ORCADs built though, Sarah.
Oh, okay.
So if you get to we've got it's pretty complex carry on. There's 14 measures because there's the two main measures, and then they each break down into their component parts as well, but we've built the whole shoot and caboodle of them. So if you want them in HCI, I can put them in there for you.
I'm not bothered, to be honest. I don't really like it. It's quite a
No, well, I don't either. It makes me
it.
want to throw up, to be honest.
Yeah, it's asking about problems in lots of different ways for the same problem, rather than thinking about from a needs perspective. Yeah.
Judith.
I was just going to say the same thing, actually. There's also the Young People's Core. I use
that
one.
Yeah, which we have, of course,
really
readily available.
I probably wouldn't recommend the ARCAS for HG. I've worked in NHS. I just feel it's a paper exercise. It's not particularly valid.
Exactly, yeah.
We've done some training with it and had like really experienced, practitioners scoring differently for the same case study. So not a fan. And it's like you say, it's very, very wordy.
Well, yes, it is very wordy. It is, forget it. Right. Well, actually, that's a great segue into this next bit, which is talking about measures and why we choose which measures and all the rest of it. So let me get back. Right. I've caught every question at the moment. So where am I? Right. Let's go back here. Share. And then get that back presenting there. Okay. Okay, so moving on to why bother. Well, the first thing I want to say is I want to thank many of you guys. I'm sure it was amongst yourselves who provided the really, for me, wonderful to read testimonials about Pragmatic Tracker and the benefits that you get in your practice. So that was great. And that went out, was available in a HGI newsletter there in early December, I think it was. So thank you very much for that. It's very encouraging for me to know about the value you get from it, But what I wanted to think about today is focusing on, standing back from this a little bit, if you like, and thinking, well, why? Okay, there's all the other stuff with Pragmatic Tracker of note keeping and reminders about appointments and all of that sort of stuff. But this whole part about the outcome measure side, why do we bother? So I'm just giving you sort of the thoughts that come into my mind. So for me, it brings the voice of the client into the process of treatment, and it's helpful in the service of the client. Now, it goes beyond that, of course, as well. And how this all started in Human Givens was it's helpful to support the organization in building up an evidence base. And then for a lot of people, though, and those of you who've worked in the NHS will know about this, you might be mandated. So Malcolm, for years, I know, was down in West Brom and would have had to, in the NHS, offer outcome measures. All of the IAP services around the country are all mandated to use outcome measures with all of their clients at every session. So there are those reasons, but really, I'm interested in focusing on this idea of bringing the voice of the client into the process and it being helpful in the service of the client. And my sort of hallucination about this is grounded really in our RIGAR model. So obviously something we're all very familiar with. But for me, in terms of rapport building, I think of the Stephen Covey 7 Habits book and seek first to understand and then to be understood. So for me, working with my clients, the outcome measures provide a way of helping me to understand the client experience as it is at the moment. And I see measures as, you've probably heard me say this before, as conversation enhancement tools. So they're bringing attention to points that I can then, having that information available to me, I can discuss with the client. So I'm looking at an outcome measure where the client has said, they're sleeping badly and they feel very anxious. And I'm able to ask, I can see things are difficult at the moment. You're sleeping poorly and you're anxious. Can you tell me a bit more about that? So it sort of segues into those sort of conversations with the client. And the way I see it anyway, is that it helps the client to feel validated and heard. Now, on top of that, in terms of information gathering, well, it's helping me to understand how you, client, are today and to gain insight into the experience of what it's like to actually be you. And then to be aware maybe with some of those questions of like, are you at risk of harm to yourself or others as well? And to become more aware of what needs are being met in your life at the moment or not being met, and to know what might be standing in the way of getting those needs met. So these are just some thoughts about the information gathering process, and do these measures actually help in that direction? And the responses to the questionnaires can often reveal a story that clients find hard to articulate. It's easier to tick a box maybe sometimes than actually come out with something. And I remember having vivid examples of this. I've had someone to turn to for support when needed, marked as none at the time, was sort of easier to say on the actual outcome measure than to actually articulate the words, which then provided the opportunity to explore it. And as therapists, these different responses can simply make the information gathering easier and help our inquiry to be more relevant. So it sort of formalizes the information gathering process. And anyone new who's, I'm not sure if anyone here today is completely new, but I think particularly for new graduates, I think that using the outcome measures helps to really get organized in your information gathering process. And in a while, we'll hear back from the rest of you, see what you have to say about all of this. To obtain relevant information quicker and to point to where the problems are greatest, but also to provide ideas about where resources might lie for people as well. And to indicate, of course, which needs are not being met and what's standing in the way of getting those needs met. So then the question is, well, okay, if we could agree that that's reasonably sensible, what measures should we use then for that process? And so really today, what I suppose the take-home message I'm trying to get across today is like, the measures you should use are the ones that you, the therapist, find best for bringing the voice of the client into the service delivery process and are most helpful to you in the service of your client. So really, for today, certainly, I'm trying to keep the focus on the interaction between therapist and client in the room. Forget about everyone else. Forget about, accountability to anybody. Forget about gathering data for human givens or anyone else. This is about, does this process serve me in my relationship with my client in helping me to do the very best for them? Now, on pragmatictracker.com, there's a button that says, what else is there? And if you click on that, you'll see measures. And if you click on measures, you'll come to this page. And most of the measures that are commonly used, particularly by human givens practitioners, are here with links to PDFs of them as well. So if there's any I'm rabbiting on about today that you haven't seen before, you can go here, you can get a PDF to actually look at the measure up close. But I just want to also make you aware that there's a lot of measures that are now available through what's called the digitalnhs.co.uk, digitalnhs.uk. And this is where the NHS have actually negotiated copyright agreements with the owners of measures in order for the measure to be widely available to the community at large. So people are able to get their own contract for free with NHS Digital to use any of the measures in there. If anyone is interested in me sending them that link, just email me afterwards. But I just want to talk about some of the common ones that we use at the moment. Okay. So I wanted to contrast two measures here. One on the left is the ORS. So the ORS, as those of you who are familiar with it will know, is a really simple measure, and there are sort of open questions. It's basically 4 ways of sort of saying, how are you doing? 0 to 10, if you like. So the client is asked, looking back over the last week, including today, let me know how you're doing in these areas of your life. Marks to the left are worst, marks to the right are best. And there's no scoring on the line or anything like that. And individually is one area, interpersonally, family, close friendships, socially, work, school, friendships, and overall. And the client just simply makes a mark on those lines. So there's no investigation of anything sort of diagnostic. There's no investigation of the level of anxiety or trauma or depression or relationship difficulty. Well, there's a bit about relationship, obviously, asking about them. But they're sort of open general questions that people can respond to. So on the one hand, we've got a really simple 4-item measure that takes like 15 seconds to fill in. On the other hand, we've got Core OM. Now the Core OM is a highly respectable measure, 34 items, which ask about a whole range of stuff to do with functioning and symptoms and risk and well-being. And it breaks down into those 4 components. And it's a very rich body of data. So, you know, you're going to learn a lot more about the client's lived experience with the Core OM in terms of what, you know, the level of anxiety they're experiencing, the trauma they might be experiencing, or whatever, than you are going to from the core, from the ORS. That's just looking at the ORS in a bit more detail. And again, you can pull those off as PDFs off the, these are all in Pragmatic Tracker anyway. And then the Core OM, you've got this detailed questionnaire. Now, millions of clients over the years have filled in these questionnaires, usually on paper, and then a massive job of translating that information onto some electronic system to analyze data and all the rest of it. A lot of work, that is. However, way back in our Luton study of 2006-07, where we had treated 124 clients, what we did was we looked at 10 of the questions within the Core OM, the Core 10. So that's 10 of the 34 items. And what we found was that, okay, you're missing 24 pieces of information, but the information you get from the Core 10 is very, very valuable, number one. And number two, if you measure a client's progress in treatment with the Core OM or the Core 10, the results are actually almost identical, which is extraordinary that the result you get from just 10 of the 34 questions gives you virtually the same score in terms of a total score value, which means that monitoring change for the client, whether it's the Core 10 or the Core OM with 34 items, tells you more or less the same thing. And we replicated that in the 5-year paper where we had thousands of clients, and we could show it again and again that whether you use Core 10 on its own or Core 34, you, in terms of the score, the psychometric properties, you got the same score, the same value. So it provided the same bang for your buck, if you like, in terms of showing change in treatment. Of course, you're missing those 24 items. And then, those of you who are familiar with YP Core is a young person's version, so under 18, sort of teenagers. And many of you for many years have been having a combination of the ORS and the Core 10. Personally, myself, I've always loved that combination. I find that you get something different out of the ORS to what you get out of the Core 10. So I you know, it basically is just 14 items, and I find that very valuable. But then, as we look back of thinking about, okay, those measures tell us about maybe a lot about understanding how you are doing today and gaining insight into the experience of being you and being aware of risk and all the rest of it. But what about this needs aspect of this? How well do they tell us about needs, about the needs that are being met at the moment, or what's standing in the way of getting those needs met? And so the challenge is, well, how can we assess in the first instance what needs are being met or not being met? And secondly, can we measure those needs? Now, I know this is like teaching grandma to suck eggs for a lot of you, but I think you'll see where I'm making the point in a second. So the emotional needs audit has been around for a long time. There's actually different varieties of it out there. And to my way of thinking, I always felt that the emotional needs audit was very useful as a means of assessing how well needs are being met or not in a client's life at the start of a course of treatment, and very useful for that purpose. However, I always had reservations about its ability to measure change in treatment. So in other words, you're measuring somebody, for example, with a Core 10, and you're also measuring them with emotional needs audit, but at the end of that treatment span, and you're looking at the change in score of the Core 10, for example, from session 1 to session 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever it might be, will you get the same dimension of change in the emotional needs audit as you will in the Core 10? And the answer to that, frankly, is no, you won't. So, and I actually can show you this now. So I set about developing the PRN14 many years ago. And to be honest with you, I got to put my hands up and say, I'm a disgrace that I haven't had 2 or 3 published papers about this by now, because we have a ton of data, both within PTSD resolution and in HGI. So a lot of you guys are very happily using the PRN14, and I'm delighted about that. And we've plenty of data to show that it is a very valid measure and that it very successfully measures change in a course of treatment as well. So my point here is that in order for a measure to be useful in measuring change, now I'm not for a minute suggesting the emotional needs audit isn't very helpful in assessing where somebody is at the starting point of treatment. But the items have got to be sensitive to change over a relatively short period of time. So a course of treatment might be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months. That's quite a short period of time. To see major shifts taking place on the emotional needs audit, you need longer than that, basically. So my position on it, as I've written many times about this, is that it's a very useful assessment tool, but it isn't very sensitive to change over the typical time frame of a course of treatment. So it's a question of you making a choice as a clinician of, well, what are the right tools for the job? What combination of instruments should I use that would be useful for me? And some may actually want the value of all the benefits of a core OM, maybe at the beginning of treatment and the end, which is actually what we did in the Luton study. We did core OM at the first appointment and the last appointment, because people valued in a similar way the assessment value of the core OM offering those answers. But many, of course, have gone for the core 10, maybe in combination with ORS, because you have 24 less items, there's much less load on the client to fill in, and many people find you still have one risk question there, and many people find that does the job for them. ENA is very good at assessing unmet need, but not very sensitive to change. PRN14 is good at assessing need and is sensitive to change. Now, so I'm not just making this stuff up. I wanted to show you actually from a snapshot from the live database. Now, please don't worry about what effect size means. Just know that a larger effect size is indicative of more change in treatment. So an effect size of 0.88, 1, anything above 1 is indicative of significant amount of change in treatment. When you get down to lower figures of 0.4, 0.5, it's a moderate sort of change. There's something happening, but it's not enormous. And in fact, in waitlist studies, when people are put on a wait list as a control, you'll often see 0.3, 0.4 change anyway, just by natural sort of recovery in a cohort of clients. Now, I just did this. This is pure, uninterfered with data, straight out of the closed cases in human given sites. So there's over 1,000 cases here measured with the PRN14, and the effect size, you may not be able to read it, is 0.88 over there on the left side. Now, I was very glad to know that there were 300 clients in the cohort, in here in the database, that therapists have used to measure with the ENA over a course of treatment, and the effect size is 0.48. So my point about this is, if you measure a group of clients with core 10, and you end up with an effect size of 0.8 or 1, and you measure the same bunch of clients with PRN14, you will end up with a similar effect size of around 0.8 or 1, which means the instrument goes along in parallel, if you like, in terms of magnitude of change. Whereas if you measure the same clients with the ENA, you won't show the same magnitude of change with the ENA. So we have the evidence for that. And just sort of wrapping up here before we open it up for chat about this, I just then went in to have a look around to look for examples of PRN14 with YP core. And this is just one example of a client that we have. There's nothing to identify client or therapist obviously here, but we're looking here at YP core. So it will have been probably a teenager, and PRN14. And just look at how beautifully they swim along together. The magnitude, you can see that the amount of change on the measures is very, very similar. And they both, more or less, when one goes up, the other goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down. They swim along like tadpoles together. I can't help but do that. That's actually a natural thing to want to do with that. So that was one example. And here's another one, which again is really interesting. And if you think of the difference in the sort of questions or the statements that are written on an ORS, how are you doing with your individually, with your friends, with your family, out in the greater society and overall, as opposed to, I have felt tense, anxious, and nervous. I've not been sleeping well, or whatever. Or then moving on to the PRN-14, which is asking about need. And yet here we have these three very, very different measures beautifully swimming along together, telling the same story, if you like. Now, you might say, well, why do you think this is important, Bill? Well, this is hugely important because we are able to say with confidence that the theoretical orientation of the human givens approach, that the concept of unmet need being equating to high levels of distress, and that as you get those needs met, your distress levels start coming down. We can show that really, really clearly in our data. And that's a great endorsement of the approach. So that the theoretical principle of the organizing idea around unmet need has a solid empirical basis for it. So it's very, to me, it's very important. So yes, it brings the voice of the client into the service process, and in my estimation, certainly it's helpful to the service of the client. Now, in this session today, I'm not addressing anything to do with supporting one's organization and anything to do with mandating or anything like that, but we will address those in future sessions. And in terms of rigor, I feel today we've more or less focused on rapport building and information gathering. And again, in another session, we'll go into more detail about using the goals aspect of Pragmatic Tracker, etc., like that. So I'm very interested now to hear what you guys have to say about all of this. So we're all right. We've got 15 minutes or so. So who's going to shoot away first? Sandra.
Bill, I was interested, why did you exclude receiving attention on the PRN-14? Because I find it's quite a different score to giving attention and different to closeness and connection. It can be a big issue for a lot of people.
Yeah,
and it doesn't show on there.
Yeah, the PRN-14 used to be the PRN-15. And what happened was, in the first psychometric data analysis, we found that that item, the correlation was so high with the measure in general, it didn't contribute anything valuable to the measure. So when you have when you're doing a psychometric assessment of a measure, what you want is a measure where each item contributes something unique to the overall value of the measure. So the idea of receiving attention correlated so strongly with other items in the questionnaire that it didn't actually add further to the psychometric value of the measure. And the reason for that is because the receiving attention bit got covered by some of the other items. So if you look at some of the other values in there, you know, the other items, the words, the receiving attention bit, by default, if you got your needs met in some, I mean, without the questionnaire in front of me, I couldn't tell you which one is which now, but do you know what I mean? That the idea of receiving attention is demonstrated anyway through, and this is very important because you see, you start off with the idea that something is actually very important to measure, and then you actually find out, well, actually it isn't. Now, that's not to say, of course, that asking that question isn't clinically very useful to you, and maybe it tells you something different. And this is where I would never suggest to anyone for a minute, if you're very comfortable and happy using the emotional needs audit as an assessment instrument to find out where people are at, by all means do that. But please be aware that it won't, you know, if you use it like a Core 10 or something else to monitor change over the courses, swimming along over the course of treatment, it won't give you the same magnitude of change. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sort of. Okay. Anybody else going to chip in there? Carmen, just unmute yourself.
Sorry. I haven't used Core OM, but I do use Core 10 all the time. And I find the last question, which is about the memories and images, if they're distressed people, that's when I straight away go into the impact of event scale.
Event scale, yeah.
So with a lot of vulnerable adults that are thinking about
taking
their lives or attempting suicide. So they're the two that I use more than anything, really, that follow up quite nicely.
Okay, great. That's great. Joe?
It's interesting, Carmen, because I really shy away from the IES because I find it, when I look at the questions, I imagine myself being triggered by the questions because they're so negative. I still use it, especially if I've got PTSD resolution clients, but I find it a bit jarring and a bit scary. I don't know if other people find that or if I'm just being over emotive. I don't know.
I think because I'm working with a lot of homelessness and there is incredible emotion around, you don't know whether they're going to come back or whether they are going to take their life between the time of seeing them. It almost feels okay, because you've got good rapport, then it feels okay to say, are you going to take your life this week? Am I going to see you next week? And it almost feels it has to be very direct because you get very short time with them.
Fair enough. I totally accept that. Yeah.
Can I just say something about response to Joe's comment? I'm not muted, am I? No.
No, you're not. No, and Jane after you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, with the IES, I actually find it helpful if I'm going to use it actually on a session that I know I'm going to do a rewind, because the triggering actually can then activate the template. So that's useful and preferable to. I don't generally send it out. I don't generally. Oh gosh, I've got an echo coming back. I don't usually send it out electronically. I do it on paper in the session. Why am I kind of speaking 3 times? Did you hear that?
You seem to have settled down again now.
Oh, right. Yeah. That really confused me. I was going to say, I would actually hold that back and do it as a paper version in the session if I need it. So I kind of do it that way.
That's actually a really good point. I like that. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm going to come to Jane next and then Abigail after Jane. Jane.
And Judith, you've just kind of half answered what I was about to ask, because I'm probably a little bit of a dinosaur with all of this. And I really love the phrase you use, Bill, of the conversation enhancement tools, because I love all of the forms and I always use them, but they're very much part of my session.
Right.
But obviously this was very much when we worked mainly in person, and I've tried to mainly do walk and talks where I can. And I am doing some Zooms because we have to. So I'm very much like to do the forms with the person. And as we've just mentioned, then if there's any sort of triggers or anything that, quite often people can feel quite emotional with any of the questions, can't they? Or it can make them feel better, or it can make them realize. So I just wanted a little bit of advice or just information really of people who do very much send the forms by email and what the different experiences and how to get around that, if that's okay.
I'm sure Joe will certainly pipe in with an answer to that in a second. Can I just come over to Abigail first of all, so I don't miss her?
Hi, yes. I've found that using a screen share with clients when you're having the session with them via Zoom or whatever, then if they haven't, so it's kind of come up that sometimes I've emailed the questionnaires to people, but they haven't actually filled them in yet. Right. So then I'll ask them if they mind doing it with me now and screen share. And it's just kind of struck me that actually for that issue with the impact of event scale, that sometimes it can trigger things that then if I'm going to planning to do a rewind with them in that session, then I might wait and get them to do it with me at the beginning of the session rather than send it out beforehand, or send it out beforehand, but not too long beforehand. So like just the day before rather than 2 days before. Or
Right. Joe, have you got something to, I know you send a lot of measures by email in advance of sessions, don't you? Do you?
I do. I tend to send them just as a matter of course. So my clients just think that's how the world is, that they get their stuff by email in advance. But I'm reviewing that with having listened to this, and I think I'm not going to put IES because I have shied away from it for that reason, because I think it's very blunt and it's very raw in what it can bring up for traumatized clients. So I like the idea of doing that one, perhaps on screen share, obviously when we're talking about doing Zoom sessions in the session. Yeah, that's all I've got to add.
Great.
But it's a matter of personal choice, and I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, to send them in advance. That's just how I do it.
Yeah, and I mean, this, I suppose this is my take-home message today, that you're like, you do this stuff, however it supports you in your best way of working with your client. Yeah, and you know, it's very different from moving away from this idea of something mandated that, oh, you know, and I mean, I know from meeting people who are forced into this sort of stuff that, you know, that's just not the way to go. It's just, you know, I mean, in a way, we've sort of moved from being too worried about outcome to seeing this as more process, if you like, that it's actually part of the therapeutic process. And I mean, in a way, you're such a fantastic illustration of this by just hearing all the diverse ways, you know, different measure choices, different ways of using the measures, sometimes getting them in email beforehand, sometimes using them in session, screen sharing, and all of the rest of it. And of course, it's all highly relevant now because of the circumstances everybody's working in, you know, as well.
Can I say, Bill, that as well as
Fiona, just one sec. Sarah, you're after Fiona, okay? Just letting you know. I've got you. Fiona.
Can I say that sending the IES initially online, I'm aware of its ability to trigger, and so I usually gather that information with them in the session when I know what we're specifically talking about, because very often they have different traumas, and I think when they're just confronted with the form with no conversation, they don't actually know what the it is.
Yes.
And so the measure that you then get, you don't know what that's actually measuring.
You don't know what it's measuring.
So I think specific discussions around the trauma and the it, I mean, if it's been one right through and you're measuring the change and you're both in agreement and you understand what it is, that's one thing. But otherwise, I think it's really important to be very clear. Otherwise, you've got a graph and you don't actually know what it is you've measured.
Right. Okay. Great point. Sarah.
I was going to say something fairly similar, really, in that the group I work with, they're nearly all traumatized. And I would say that doing the IES is an effective way of activating the trauma template. And if you don't want that to happen, don't do it remotely. So I would say, actually, I use it to then demonstrate self-calming techniques, or I use it prior to a rewind, and one of those methods to resolve activating that template. Yeah,
it's so great to hear this. I mean, I've never heard this before today, you know, this idea of actually using the measure to activate the template. And it's I mean, it sort of stares you in the face, doesn't it? It's sort of obvious, and yet, you know, I've not heard it. So
well, asking them to you know, to actually raise it themselves, asking them to imagine that feeling actually seems quite cruel for some young people to do. Whereas having it really specified on a form where they can slightly focus on something else, about actually they understand these symptoms, they know what's going on, rather than having to evoke the whole event. I've not had a case where it hasn't been effective as a way of activating that template. Yeah, so it's a useful tool for that.
Oh, fantastic. Carmen?
I also post rewind use it again, because it really just shows then the change and improvement. And I think they really like to see that too. That they've made
That's great. That's great. Yeah, excellent.
I've also found the Cries 8 very good, Bill.
All right, this is a measure for children, right? For children with trauma. So just I think, Fiona, you'd asked me, could I get that in there for you, and we got it in there for you, didn't I?
Yes, I think what I would quite like it on the HGI one as well as the resolution one.
Consider it done, Fiona.
Thank you.
But it is very useful.
I've used it mainly trying to manage a service that's actually I've set up in Africa.
Oh yes, you were telling me about that.
And they're doing creative traumatic rewinds on children in refugee communities. So we've trained refugee adults.
Oh, fantastic.
And and they send me the CRIES 8 before and after and follow-up scores.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's brilliant to have that.
Anna just asked, what is that measure for children with trauma? It's called the CRIES 8, and I haven't got it up there on the website. But what I can do is I can send you, I can switch it on for you in HCI, and you can have a look at it. You know, I always recommend, by the way, you've probably heard me say this many times before, to create a pretend client of yourself, so you can send yourself measures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you see what they actually look like, you know. So
can I make another quick comment, please, Bill?
Yes.
It's just I've come to the realization, a certain realization over the last week or so, because I work with a lot of adolescents, teenagers, and I've been having a really poor success rate of them returning measures.
Right.
And I've only recently realized it's because they're so bombarded with emails from school and stuff. And like one young girl I saw yesterday said, I don't check my emails. So I'm going to start, I realized I need to start using SMS with these youngsters, because they tend to respond, I think, to that form of messaging much more than emails.
That's a great point. And actually, I would just add to that something Fiona, we figured out with Fiona, because Fiona was telling me there last year about how she uses WhatsApp a lot with her PTSD resolution clients, you know. So, of course, in fact, I think I better just show you this as a sort of a last thing before we go. Where we go there. Oops. Let me go over here. Right. So if I'm, I'll just create a quick session here. Therapy. I'll just leave it as ORS, right? So create that session. Now, if I don't send out the questionnaires automatically, you know, through the system, what I can do is go to the, you're on the session record page, right? Go to session, send, and this window pops up. Now that link there is the link to the questionnaires. So if you use WhatsApp desktop, which you can do, you can have WhatsApp on your desktop, and then you can just pop that link into the WhatsApp, and then it'll go straight to the client. Obviously, you can use the SMS facility as well, you know, if you want that. But I wanted to show you the other thing you can do is in a live session, if someone hasn't filled in a measure and you want them to fill it in, and you're on Zoom, you can do exactly the same thing and take that and pop it into the chat. Like I can copy that now and go over there to the chat and pop it in. So then it's a link to the questionnaire, and the client can fill it in there and then in the Zoom call with you, you know. Somebody was going to ask me something about that. I'll stop to share. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Anna? Yeah? Who was it? Did somebody have something to say about that? Oh, there's hands up all over the place. I need to come to Martin first and then Joe. Martin.
Just to recap on this idea about tracking change with the emotional needs audit, what I found is that if you can give a direction to the client to answer the emotional needs audit within the context of the problem they're experiencing, it might seem like it's a very simple thing, because, for example, they could be getting great attention in one scenario, but very little in a situation in which the problem resides. So it seems like there should almost be a direction on the emotional needs audit to answer it within the context of whatever they're bringing.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And that, I mean, you know, as I say, you know, it's again, it's a matter of figuring out how to use these things in a way that you find most beneficial to you. But me sort of standing back looking at aggregated data, I want to know if Martin is doing really well with his client, I want him to be measuring that in a way that's demonstrating that properly, you know, because otherwise you're losing the sort of ability to tell that story, if you like, you know. But you're absolutely right. You just, you know, if that helps in your conversation enhancement tool as a tool with your client, that's completely fine. But I would say also use something else like Core 10 or something like that as well, you know. Joe.
Yeah, sorry, these points feel ancient now because they were relevant at the time, but just two things I wanted to add in. One is I don't want to give the impression that I randomly fire off all these things to everybody willy-nilly. There are some people I would never ever use them with. If I get the feeling that they're just stressed out by stuff, that they don't like doing forms, that they hate paperwork or admin online, I never even use them, and I'll just use simple scaling, like how much is it bothering you out of 10, and you just use that instead. So that was the first point. And the second point, coming back to I can't remember who, someone was talking really eloquently about using it to open the templates, the IES.
Oh yes, Judith started that one off. Yeah.
Bad state, and you don't want to, it was young people I think, or children, and you really don't want to get them tipped over the edge about opening the template. I use a thing where I say, just allow yourself to, I think it was Sarah Simon who was saying it. I use just allow yourself to feel maybe just 1% of it, or just feel a tiny bit of that feeling in your little finger. So I try and keep it really, really comfortable
contained.
for them. Got that sense of being able to contain it, or they could even put it in a bucket and just feel it a bit. You can be a bit creative with putting that template so that it's just a think.
Great, thanks Joe very much as always. Guys, it's 11:05. I think we better round it up. Has anyone got anything burning left that they want to make sure they get said? I hope I see people have been contributing. That's fantastic in the chat as well. That's great.